Pokemon! Pokemon. Pokemon? Nope. Pokemon books. Pokemon! Nope. Pokemon toy. Pokemon? No. A book. About real animals. Well, since I'm here... Hello, everyone! Rocket Wayne is here to join you for another adventure as we enter October. Always remember that as we go through these amazing stories and read these outstanding adventures, all you have to do is press the CC button to be able to join along with the words. Now I think that North Star will be perfect to join us for today's adventure. Now that North Star's here, let's jump into the story. Howliday Inn. The Departure. Looking back on it now, I doubt that there was any way I could have imagined what lay ahead. After all, I'm not as well a reader as Chester. And except for the time I'd run away from home as a puppy and spent a frightful night under a neighbor's porch, I really had very little experience of my own in the outside world. How could I have begun to imagine what would befall me that fateful week in August? If the memories that week no longer make my blood run cold, they still have enough of a chill to affect to give me pause. Why, you may wonder, do I wish to stir them up now when I could easily curl up in front of a nice warm radiator and think about happier times instead? The answer? A simple one, really. It is this. Whatever else may be said of that week, it was an adventure. And adventures, no matter how dark or disturbing to recall, are meant to be shared. It began innocently enough on a beautiful summer's day. The kind of day I remember thinking, when the universe seems in perfect order and nothing can go wrong. A soft breeze ruffled the hairs along my neck. Birds chirped happily in the trees. A butterfly landed on my nose and would have stayed for a while, I think, if I hadn't sneezed them off. The sky was blue. The sun was gold. The grass was green. Such riches cannot be bought for any price, I thought, as I stretched out on the front yard, chewing contently on Mr. Monroe's new running shoes. Without warning, my blissful mood was shattered by the sound of Toby's voice coming from within the house. "Why?" he kept repeating, a bit unpleasantly. His mother answered him in an ever-patient way of hers. "You've asked me several times, Toby, and I keep telling you the same thing. I know you're not happy about it, but we can't take him with us." "But why? Why?" Toby insisted loudly. I noticed several butterflies flutter away from our yard defensively. "We've taken Harold and Chester on vacation with us before," he whined. My ears perked up. I was the topic of discussion. "Just to the lake house, Toby. Never on a car trip," Miss Monroe said. "There won't be room. Besides, you know how Harold gets car sick. You won't want him to be miserable, would you?" "No," agreed Toby sensibly. "I guess you're right." "Darn right she is," I thought. "But Mom, I'm going to miss them, Mom," Toby answered. Mrs. Monroe voice softened. "I know you are, Toby. We'll all miss them. But we'll be gone only a week, and then we'll see them again. Think of everything you'll be able to tell Harold when you get home." "Yeah, I guess so," Toby said, his voice trailing off in defeat. Poor kid, I thought. He's really broken up. Well, I couldn't blame him. I was a lot of fun after all. It was natural he'd want to take me along. I mean, who would he play fetch the stick with? Whose tummy would he rub? Suddenly, panic seized me. Who was going to feed us? I dropped my Adidas, moved quickly to the front door, and began scratching at the screen. "Hi, Harold," Toby said to me as he let me in. He looked at me sadly and put his arms around my neck. "I'm sorry, boy. Mom says we can't take you on vacation this time. I'll bet you'll feel really disappointed, huh?" "Who's going to feed me?" I asked with my eyes. "But don't worry, we'll be back in a week. It won't be so long. Still, you feel bad you're not going, don't you?" "I know." "Who's going to feed me?" I pleaded with a hint of whisper. "Oh, if you're wondering what's going to happen to you while you're away, yes," I asked, my eyes growing louder. "Don't worry, Mom and Dad have that all figured out. See, Bunnicula is going to stay next door at Professor Micklewhite's house." I glanced over at the windowsill where the rabbit's cage was kept and saw that it had already been removed. I felt myself breaking into a cold sweat. What was going to happen to me? "And you and Chester are going to be boarded." "Oh," I thought, feeling relieved immediately. "That's all then." Just the little detail troubled me. I didn't have the slightest idea what being boarded meant. I decided to find Chester to ask him about it, since Chester knows, or thinks he knows, something about almost everything. When I found him, he was sitting in the backyard staring off into space. Chester, being a cat, is very good at staring off into space. He once explained to me that this was his way of meditating, or as he liked to put it, getting mellow. At the moment I found him, he looked so mellow I thought there was a good chance of ripening and rotting right there before my eyes, if I didn't shake him out of it quickly. The Monroes are leaving, and they're going to do something with us with boards, I told him. Don't say hello or anything, Chester replied, without moving a muscle. Sorry. Hello, Chester. How's it going? Chester nodded his head slowly, as if he were supposed to be telling me something. Now, what was that about boards, he asked at last. I'm not sure. They're leaving, and they're going to tie us to boards or something. That's all I know. I'm sure that's not all you know, Harold, he said smoothly. It may be all your brain can handle right now, and I'm sure you know at least one or two more things. Now let's try again. What exactly did you hear? Well, I explained. Toby told me that while the family goes on vacation, you and I are going to get boarded. Boarded? Chester exclaimed, his mellow eyes suddenly gone in passing breeze. We're going to get boarded? I can't believe they do this to us. It figures. That's all I can say. It just figures. What figures, I asked. What are they going to do to us? Oh, just lock us up and throw away the key, that's all. Prison, Harold. That's what it boils down to. We're in their way, and now they want to go off and have some fun. So out of the door we go, into some dark pit, where we'll be fed moldy bread and rainwater. If we're lucky. You don't know what these places are like, Harold, but I do. How? I asked. Were you ever boarded? Was I ever boarded? Was I ever boarded? That's what I asked, Chester. Were you ever boarded? I've read Charles Dickens' Sport, in his only reply, then turned his attention to his tail, which he suddenly felt compelled to bathe. A scowl grew on his face, and I thought that if it were possible, dark rain clouds would have formed around his eyebrows. I'll tell you something else, Harold, he muttered. His hysteria had subsided, and he spoke now in a low, serious tone. What's that? You have to keep your eyes open all the time in places like those. You never know what'll happen next. What do you mean? I asked. Think about it, he went on. A group of strangers are thrown together by circumstance. Who knows who they are, where they're coming from, what they'll be doing. The one smiling at you from across the food dish in the morning could murder you in your sleep at night. Chester, I said, interrupting. I think perhaps your imagination is running away with you. Ha! Chester snorted. Mark my words, Harold. Keep your eyes open and the door shut. Just remember, they aren't called strangers for nothing. He walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. With everything Chester said about strangers, it was hard at that moment to picture anyone stranger than Chester. But time would certainly bear out his warning, and I have to admit that even then, there was something in the conviction with the way he spoke that made me uneasy. So much so that when I saw Mr. Monroe coming my direction, I was suddenly distrustful. And this of a man whose home I had lived in for years and whose running shoes I had been eating for moments before. Hey Harold, guess what? You're going away on a little vacation. Aren't you lucky? I smelled a con job and kept my distance. You and Chester are going to stay at a nice animal hotel for a few days. You'll meet some new friends. Doesn't that sound like a lot of fun? Doesn't that sound terrific? Interesting. He doesn't mention the food, I thought. Having no intention of being conned into living on mold and rainwater, I decided to try a tactic I saved only for the most dire circumstances. I was, as pitifully as I knew how, I started to whimper. Aw, poor Harold, Mr. Monroe said quietly, reaching down to pat me on the top of the head. I was sure I'd hoped. I wish we could take you with us, fellow, but we can't. Rats. Besides, you'll have a good time at Chateau Bow Wow. Doesn't that sound like a nice place to stay? Now, come on, boy, he said, moving back towards the driveway. Jump up here into the back of the station wagon. Chateau Bow Wow, I thought as I followed him. Doesn't sound so bad. Not the Waldorf Astoria, maybe, but not bad. Still, I wasn't sure I wanted to go anywhere, particularly after everything Chester had told to me. I lifted my head and let out a soft, muttered moan. When I dropped my head again, I noticed Chester lying under the car in the shade by the rear tire. He looked at me and shook his head slowly. What a disgusting display, he said, sighing heavily. But what can one expect from a dog, after all? Well, I replied, I'm glad to see that you're so resigned to be dragged off to prison. I'm not resigned yet, he said calmly, looking. I'm not going. Oh, really? I asked. And just how do you manage to intend that? Before he could answer, Mrs. Monroe came out of the front door with Chester's carrier, a large square box with a little window on the end. I always tell Chester that it looks like he's on television when he's inside. He doesn't find that very amusing. In fact, Just the sight of his character is usually enough to send him into a panic, hissing and hyperventilating up a storm. This time, however, he seemed determined to remain cool. "Toby," Mrs. Monroe instructed to her youngest son, "see if you and Pete can find Chester, will you?" Pete appeared behind the door behind Toby. "Excuse me," Chester said to me. "It's time for my exit." And so saying that, he made a mad dash for the nearest lilac bush. Unfortunately for him, Toby and Pete were on to his favorite hiding places. And Pete, who had taken up jogging with his dad, was fast on Chester's heels. Grabbing him by the tail, not the best place to grab anyone, let alone a cat, Pete yanked him back into his arms before Chester could do much more than let out a yelp of disapproval. Pete then attempted to force Chester into his waiting carrier, but Chester spread out all 4 legs so that his big paws clamped on the edges of the boxes. With his legs held rigidly in place, he screamed and hissed, and he generally let it be known in no uncertain terms that he had no intentions of going anywhere. All, however, was to no avail, for he was quickly surrounded by the entire Monroe family, and before he knew, he had happened to be squashed into the carrier and plopped into the car. I, on the other hand, went with quiet dignity, allowing myself to be lured into the back of the station wagon by a chocolate cupcake. And Mr. Monroe's calm affirmation that adventure was good for the soul. Chester and I had a few moments alone before the rest of the family joined us, licking the last traces of chocolate frosting from my nose. I turned to the beast growling inside the cat carrier. I was intrigued by Mr. Monroe's statement about the effect of adventure on the soul, and thought perhaps I could pass the time engaging Chester in a deep philosophical conversation. "Well, Chester," I began, "what do you think?" "I think you made a fool out of yourself over that cupcake," he said. Then again I thought, perhaps not. I decided another tact. "You know, Chester," I said, trying to sound cheerful, "maybe there's nothing for us to worry about. The way Mr. Monroe tells it, Chateau Bow Wow sounds like a pretty nice place." Chester, who had been grumbling under his breath all this time, was suddenly quiet. "What did you say?" he asked after a moment. "I said Chateau Bow Wow. Sounds like a really nice place." "Chateau Bow Wow?" "Chateau Bow Wow." Chester's face appeared in the window. His eyes were gleaming. "What's the problem?" I asked. "Oh, there's no problem, Harold. None at all. Just because I'm being forced to spend a week of my life in a place obviously run by dog chauvinists who are totally insensitive to my feline feelings." Oh my goodness. Why would that bother me? No, I don't have a problem at all, Harold. It's the rest of the world who have problems. "Gee, you know, Chester," I said to him, "you look a lot like a guest on a talk show." "Harold, have you heard a word I've said?" "Chester, could you pretend you're on a talk show? You know, just say, 'Geez, it's swell to be here, Merv.' Or, well, you know, Mike, maybe it's funny you should ask about that. Okay, Chester, huh? Sing feelings, okay? Chester? Chester?" Chester glared at me and dropped out of sight. I heard him muttering something about dogs, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. I stopped trying after the Monroes had gotten into the car, and I noticed we were pulling out of the driveway. There was a rumble of thunder in the distance as the car went over a bump and my stomach lurched. Why, I asked myself, had I eaten that chocolate cupcake? I closed my eyes and gritted my teeth. Toby and Pete were fighting about who had the best window. Mrs. Monroe was trying to quiet them down, at the same time pointing out that Mr. Monroe had just taken a wrong turn. Chester, meanwhile, was grumbling and hissing inside his carrier. "Mark my word, Harold," I heard them say at one point, "there's trouble ahead." Don't say I didn't warn you. As I was thinking back on the feelings of peace and contentment with which I started that day, Mr. Monroe turned up the volume. "So the outlook for the rest of the week," the announcer was saying, "is heavy, rainy, and thunderstorms." Everyone groaned. The car hit another bump, and my stomach began to feel like a washing machine on spin cycle. This adventure, I thought, may be terrific for my soul, but it's going to wreak havoc on my digestive system. Oh wow, that was a really cool place to end today's adventure. What did you think, North Star? I like that part too. Thank you for joining me on today's adventure. And thank you for joining me on today's adventure here with Wayne Reads with Rocket Wayne. Hope you enjoyed, and we can't wait to see you again. Bye-bye.